Hello and welcome, friends. West Asia is going through a major turmoil. We have this war going on. Every day, we are hearing news about the escalation and an emerging scenario in which everyone is predicting all kinds of doomsday scenarios. But the most important question for us is that what are its impact going to be on India? We see that a lot of analysts, generals, and media is giving a coverage which is very anti-Israel, anti-US, and they are making a lot of claims about India's civilizational linkages with Iran and also Iran's fight against the Western colonialism. I think all these narratives need to be questioned, and the situation needs to be examined in the context of pure realpolitik and India's national security interests. So, in this video, I am going to talk about the impact of the ongoing war on India's national security interest. Though in the beginning, I'll briefly mention about the economic part, the major focus would certainly be on the impact in purely security terms. So coming to the economic part, as we all know that India imports 40% of its crude oil from and 80% of its LNG from the Straits of Hormuz. And the major exporters in West Asia are Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. Besides that, 63% of our nitrogen fertilizers, they also come from the Gulf countries, Oman, Saudi, and Qatar. We have about 10 million Indian workers in West Asia, and India is one of the largest receivers of the remittances. We received $70 billion in 2024. To mitigate these impacts, now definitely because of the ongoing war, our oil supplies and gas supplies have come to face a major obstruction. But to mitigate these challenges, India is diversifying its oil and gas imports. Now today, 70% of our crude imports are coming from routes which are outside the Strait of Hormuz. We are finding new countries from where we can import, like Russia, Venezuela. Domestic LPG production has also gone up by 25%. Still, we continue to face trade deficits and inflationary pressures. But having said that, I think this is not the most important part of the impact of this war on India's security concerns. The most important part is the security domain, is the future of geopolitics in South Asia, which will be impacted because of this war. Now, I want to focus on that in this video. Firstly, let me tell you that whatever coverage that we see in India, which sounds to be portraying Iran as some kind of a winner in this war, maybe Iran is giving a strong contest to America and Israel, but definitely partly this kind of projection and this kind of portrayal is also coming from the deep-rooted anti-Western bias that Indian analysts, diplomats, geopolitical experts, and the media has against the West. And this bias is deeply rooted in the Cold War politics and also India's insecurities because of its long history of control by foreign powers. And also, people talk about the civilizational ties between India and Iran. Now, let me begin this by busting this narrative of civilizational ties. I must state that whatever civilizational ties that we had with Iran was during the Persian times, that is before the advent of Islam in Iran. And so before that, definitely there were a lot of cultural exchanges, similarities between Iran and India. But after Iran came to be invaded by the Islamic rulers, after that, the most of the interactions were of a very different natures. Mughals were ruling India, and Mughals, they had cultural, economic, and family relations, exchanges, etc., with the Iranians, but they were mostly of the colonial nature. Later, Nadir Shah from Iran came to India, looted Delhi. So whenever we talk about the deep-rooted civilizational ties with Iran, I think we must, think twice and also get into the roots of these civilizational exchanges. So today, the regime which rules Iran, that is totally a theocratic regime, which is guided by very irrational, extremist ideas about religion. It has been supporting terrorist proxies and monstrous extremist organizations. Now let us just talk about Kashmir. So Iranian regime has equated Kashmir with the Palestine, and it has on various occasions raised Islamist issues, particularly about India. For example, like after the abrogation of Article 370, Iranian government criticized India. After we brought the CAA NRC to control the flow of illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Iranian government criticized India, saying that Indian government is basically exploiting and going against the Muslims in the country. So those criticisms and those policy stances were purely driven by religious motives. When the Iranian, the last Khamenei, Ayatollah, when he came to Kashmir in 1981, he spoke from Jamia Mosque and he said that, well, the Muslims of this country, the followers have to unite and go see beyond the nation and unite for the religious cause. So we see that basically the Iranian regime is purely guided by religious motives, and whatever tactical support that they gave us to gave to India, particularly in the international forums, that was purely transactional in nature. So I think we must, take it with a pinch of salt when we talk about civilizational ties. And in this context, I also should mention that Burhan Wani, the famous terrorist commander of Hizbul Mujahideen in Kashmir, was hailed as a hero in several Iranian universities. And on the other hand, look at Israel. Israel has given us weapons. Israel gives us drones. In the Operation Sindoor, when the entire world stood against us, Israel was the country which supported India in diplomatic forums. Also, Israel gave us the best kind of drone technology, which enabled us to fight against the Pakistan. Besides that, we have a strong counter-terrorism and intelligence and strategic partnership with Israel. So that's where you can easily decide, like, where do we stand to gain, in the victory of Iran or in the victory of Israel? Now, the question is that India's biggest security challenge, I call it an existential challenge, threat, it comes from radical Islam. Now, this threat has an internal dimension as well as external dimension. In India itself, within the Indian territory, there is a huge, decisive segment of radicalized, I would say, Islamist elements and organizations which are presenting a grave threat to India's integrity and national security. These threats have increased hugely after 2014 because they see the Modi government as an anti-Muslim government, and they don't like Modi government's tough posturing against terrorism and on security matters. And we can see that the polarization is increasing, communal frictions are increasing, and this huge segment of radical Islamists is strongly connected with the global Islam, the global jihadism. And they get inspired when Taliban comes back to power in Afghanistan, when in Syria a former ISIS terrorist comes to power, and when Iran also comes out as a winning state against the Americans and Israelis. Their hopes, their aspirations, and their motives get emboldened. We are facing a civil war like situation in India at the grassroots level, and I know that most of the policy makers, they tend to turn a blind eye towards these existential threats which are pretty much visible at the grassroots. But I must say that any victory of Iran in West Asia, or an embarrassment for Israel or Americans, will certainly embolden these radical Islamist elements in India, and it's not going to be a good sign for India's national security. Because the religious passion certainly is blind, and it gets driven by such religious victories. Most of the South Asian Muslims, Sunnis and Shias alike, tend to see this war between Iran and US Israel as a religious war, as a war against Christians, war against Jewish people, and they see that India is definitely supporting Israel and America in this war, though the Indian government says that it is maintaining a neutral stand, but that Indian government still towards Israel and America is clearly visible, and the Muslim segment, almost an overwhelming segment of the Muslims in India, including the radical Islamists, they see India as a partner country with Israel and with the US. So we must really think about the impact which this war will have on the morale of the radical Islamists in India if Israel and the US have to face an embarrassing rout in that situation. Secondly, if, let's say, a hypothetical situation, things are not very clear, and definitely Americans have given an ultimatum which is going to end on 6th April, and most likely it seems that they're going to intensify their bombings. But let's say, like, in case if Americans, hypothetically, if they have to face some kind of an embarrassment, or if they have to withdraw from the Middle East, that's certainly going to strengthen all kinds of anti-India forces like Turkey, Qatar, and all kinds of Islamist forces like Muslim Brotherhood, Al Qaeda, ISIS, and Shia militias. Iranian regime in the past has hobnobled with the various Islamist forces like the Al Qaeda. They've also maintained relations with Taliban. They've maintained ties with Muslim Brotherhood. No. So this is going to lead to a situation where the regional security architecture of the Gulf will be massively changed. Definitely, Iran will emerge as a major player in this regional security architecture. And since Iranian regime will be much weakened, so to replace Iran, it will be the next in line would be Turkey. And we know that Turkey is very anti-India. Turkey is a friend of Pakistan. Turkey is a highly Islamist country. So in that case, we can see that some sort of a ganging up of anti-India forces in West Asia, which includes countries like Pakistan, Turkey, Qatar, and even the Arab countries, the other Arab countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, they will be compelled to change their political and geopolitical posturing stances if Americans have to withdraw from the Middle East. Definitely, Israel will be in a bad shape because after that, the Islamist forces, or at least the Islamist sentiments, will be much more dominant in the geopolitics of West Asia. And we can see that Pakistan is playing a crucial role even now in mediating a ceasefire. Pakistan has hosted Egyptians, Pakistan has hosted Turkey and other countries like Qatar, and they're trying to negotiate a ceasefire for Americans with the Iranians. Recently, Pakistan's foreign minister traveled to China to mediate the ceasefire. So we can see the weight which Pakistan is gaining in this whole security framework and this in this emerging strategic calculus of West Asia. Though our policymakers and our governments, our strategic experts will keep denying that Pakistan is just a messenger, not a mediator, but we cannot deny the fact that Pakistan is certainly gaining in stature, given that the Pakistan has strong ties with the Trump's America, with Iranians, and they refuse to support the Saudis despite signing that strategic agreement. Then the most interesting part is that they completely went against that agreement, and even their population, which is the majority Sunni, they're not going against Pakistan. Even the mostly the Sunni population of Pakistan is also praising the government stance of not joining the Israelis and Americans against Iran. So this is a major problem for India. And we know that Bangladesh has already gone into the hands of Islamists. It's deeply in the throes of the anti-India Islamist forces. Now, let's say if the Americans have to withdraw, then and Israelis get weakened in West Asia, then India will be surrounded with all kinds of, I would say, radical Islamist forces like Pakistan, supported by Turkey, Azerbaijan, Qatar, Bangladesh. They're playing havoc with the internal security situation of India. We know that a lot of terror funding is coming, a lot of radicalization activities are going on. But imagine a situation in which there's a future war between India and Pakistan, and in that case, Pakistan will be emboldened with the support of countries like Turkey, Qatar, and Azerbaijan. Iran also is not likely to support India in that war because Iran has taken a serious note of India's stance in the ongoing war. So India will be in dire straits. Finally, if the Americans withdraw from the Middle East, it'll be China, it'll be Russia, most importantly China, which will be emerging as a dominant player in West Asia. And we know what China is for India. China is India's long-term adversary. China supported Pakistan during the Operation Sindoor with real-time intelligence. So I think we must look at the long-term impact of this war on India's national security concerns, and whether we like Americans or not, that's a different thing. We may have major disagreements with Trump. I guess everyone has. People don't like him, but as far as our hardcore national security interests are concerned, I wouldn't hesitate in saying that our security, our interests lie very firmly with the Americans and Israelis. Thank you very much.